I'm Bessie. The tension in the air was palpable as I sat at the dinner table, surrounded by my family on my mother's birthday. The question from my mother, "So, Bessie, how's work?" hung in the silence, a grenade lobbed with a smile. I took a deep breath and met her eyes. "Work is fine, Mom." Her head tilted and she said, "Fine. I thought you lost your job." The room seemed to tighten, and I could feel everyone's eyes on me. I held my mother's gaze and said, "I didn't lose anything. I never lost my job. I told each of you I did, same story, same details. I wanted to see who'd show up." The shock on their faces was almost comical, but it was also a moment of truth. Todd, my brother, put down his beer forcefully. "You're saying you lied to us?" I turned to him and said, "I told you I was in trouble and I watched what each of you did with that information. You said you'd ask around, but you didn't. You just told Janet at the Speedway about my situation like it was weather. And then you bought an $800 grill." Todd's face went white. "How do you know about the grill?" I replied, "You but dialed me. I heard the whole conversation between you and Mom in the kitchen. She said she didn't have it in the budget to help me, but then you told her about the Weber Genesis and she said, 'Oh, that's nice.' I then looked at my sister, Kristen. 'And you? You said you'd call me back that night.' That was 5 weeks ago." Her eyes were wet as she stammered, "I meant to. I was going to." I said gently, "I know. But meaning to is the most comfortable way to do nothing." My mother, Evelyn, stood up, her chair scraping the floor. "So, this was a game to you?" I stayed seated and said, "No, it was a question, and every one of you answered it." Evelyn's hands were shaking as she gripped the back of her chair. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "You made us look. You made me look." I said calmly, "I didn't make you look like anything, Mom. I gave you a chance to show up. You chose not to." She turned to my father, Henry. "Say something. Are you just going to sit there?" Henry opened his mouth, closed it, and then said quietly, "She's right, Evelyn." The room fell silent. It was a moment that I had been waiting for, a moment of clarity. I then said, "I've already made my decision. I changed my will 2 weeks ago before any of you knew about the test. My life insurance, my retirement accounts, the rental condo in Dayton. I went to an estate attorney and redirected everything to my cousin, Lily." The shock that followed was almost deafening. Kristen exclaimed, "You can't do that." I replied, "I can. In Ohio, a competent adult can name any beneficiary they choose." My attorney confirmed it. Evelyn pointed at Lily. "You two planned this." Lily shook her head. "I found out about the test 2 weeks ago, Aunt Evelyn. I found out about the will 30 seconds ago. Same as you." I looked around the table and said, "I asked a question." Everyone answered. I filed the paperwork. There was no plan. There was just math. Let me take you back to how it all started. I've been a bookkeeper for 9 years, working for a small accounting firm in Dayton. I put myself through college with hard work and determination, working long hours at a local diner. By the time I was 26, I had my degree and was on my way to building a stable life. I bought a small rental condo, and my retirement account was looking healthy. My life insurance policy was worth $250,000. But over the years, I realized that I had been the one holding the family together. Every month, without being asked, I sent my mother $200 to help with the bills. I covered Todd's car down payment 3 years ago, $3,000 that he never returned. I paid Kristen's credit card bill when she was in a tight spot. And I drove my father to his doctor's appointments when my mother said she was too busy. I thought that's what family meant, but I started to notice a pattern. Every Thanksgiving, I would drive 2 hours to my mother's house, bringing a delicious meal and all the fixings. Todd would bring beer, and Kristen would bring her husband. I would be the one to start the conversation and clean up afterwards. No one ever thanked me. On my 30th birthday, I waited for a call. Todd texted me HBD at 11 at night, and my mother called the next morning, saying she had been too busy. I knew she wasn't. I had seen her post pictures of her garden on social media. That's when I decided to open a spreadsheet. I filled in column A with what I had given, column B with what I had received, and column C with who called first. The numbers were stark. Over 5 years, I had given $12,400, and I had received nothing in return. 87% of the phone calls were initiated by me. And no one in my family had ever asked me how I was without following it with a request. I realized that I had been the safety net for so long that I had forgotten to check if anyone would catch me if I fell. So, I came up with a plan. I decided to run an audit, not a trap. I wanted to see who would show up when I needed them the most. I set 3 rules. First, I would tell each family member the same story. My company was downsizing, and I was in the layoff. My landlord was pressuring me about the lease. Second, I wouldn't ask anyone for money. I would just tell them the situation and watch. Third, I gave myself 3 weeks. That was the window. I rehearsed the call in my car during my lunch break. I called my mother first. She picked up on the 3rd ring, her voice light as she was watching a cooking show. I told her my story, keeping my voice steady. When I finished, she said, "Oh, that's a lot, Bessie. Well, you've always been resourceful." And then she hung up. I called my father next. He answered on the 1st ring. When I told him the story, he said he would talk to my mother. I knew what that meant. Talking to my mother about money was like talking to a brick wall. Todd was next. I caught him on his lunch break at the car dealership. He sounded distracted and said he would ask around. I knew it was just a gesture. Kristen promised to call me back that night, but she never did. The next day, I saw her post on Instagram about a night out at a wine bar. It was clear that she had forgotten about me. But then, on the 6th day, my phone rang. It was Lily, my cousin, the one my family considered the disappointment. She said, "Bessie, I just heard from Aunt Evelyn that you lost your job. Why didn't you call me?" I told her I didn't want to burden her. She asked, "How much do you need for rent this month?" I gave her a number, $600. 40 minutes later, I received a notification. Lily had wired me $600 from her checking account, which had only $940 in it. She sent me 64% of everything she had, without asking any questions or offering any advice. It was a moment that changed everything. As the days went by, my family's lack of response became more and more apparent. Todd posted pictures of his new grill on social media, and Kristen continued to post about her social life. My father called once, but he was cut off by my mother's arrival home. On the 14th day, Lily showed up at my door with a casserole and a grocery bag. She said, "I figured you might not be eating right." We sat at the table, and she told me about her own layoff 5 years ago. She said that she had learned who really cared when she fell apart in public. I almost told her the truth then, but I held back. I knew that the time wasn't right. A few days later, I received a missed call from Todd. It was a butt dial, and I heard a conversation between him and my mother. They were talking about me, saying that I would land on my feet. My mother said she didn't have it in the budget to help me, but then they started talking about Todd's new grill. That's when I decided to take action. I called an estate attorney and changed my will. I removed all my current beneficiaries and named Lily as the sole beneficiary of everything. The week before my mother's birthday, I met Lily for lunch. I told her the truth about the test. She was shocked at first, but then she understood. I told her that I was returning the $600, but that she was the only one who had shown up for me. A few days before the birthday dinner, Todd ran into Lily at a gas station. He asked about me, and Lily, who is kind but not always careful with her words, let it slip that I was fine. Todd suspected something was off and called my mother. My mother and Kristen started to put two and two together. They decided to confront me at the birthday dinner. They didn't know that I had already changed my will. And that brings us back to the dinner table. After I revealed the truth, there was a long silence. My father stood up and walked around the table to me. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Your mother and I should have done better." I picked up my coat and prepared to leave. Todd said, "You're really going to walk out of Mom's birthday dinner?" I looked at him and said, "I brought a gift. I showed up for dinner. I answered every question. Honestly, that's more than anyone in this room did for me 5 weeks ago." I turned to my mother and said, "Happy birthday, Mom." And then I walked out the door. Lily followed me outside. She said, "You didn't have to do that." "The will thing." I replied, "Yes, I did. Because numbers don't lie, Lily, and neither do you." She reached out and squeezed my arm. We walked to our separate cars. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. In the weeks that followed, the calls started to come in. Todd called twice, but I let the calls go to voicemail. Kristen sent a long text, explaining why she hadn't been there for me. My father called and we had a long, honest conversation. Lily texted me, saying that she had deposited my $600 check, but that she would have wired it again if I needed it. At Thanksgiving, I brought Lily to my mother's house. I didn't bring a big casserole this time. I brought a salad and a bottle of wine. My mother noticed, but she didn't say anything. Todd was polite but distant. He asked me if we were okay, and I said, "We're getting there." Kristen hugged me when she left and said she was going to do better. I stopped sending my mother $200 a month. She noticed, but she didn't bring it up. Todd never mentioned the $3,000 he owed me. The will stayed. Lily knew that my family suspected but couldn't confirm. I bought Lily a winter coat, and she cried when she opened it. I told her, "I'm not keeping score anymore." That's the whole point. People will show you exactly who they are the moment you stop being useful to them. And the ones who stay are the only ones who were ever really there. That's my story. 3 weeks of silence, one cousin who drove 40 minutes with a casserole she couldn't afford, and a will that now says exactly what it should have said all along. If this story reminds you to look around and notice who's actually showing up in your life, hold on to them. And if you've got someone in your family who the world calls a disappointment, but who's never once disappointed you, tell them today. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.